What's up, everyone? It's Austin in the Middle. Welcome to my channel. If you haven't been here before, I've decided to start talking about comic stories that I love. And this is going to be an ongoing series. It's going to cover various genres within comic books. It's going to also include graphic novels sometimes, even full-on mangas or manga issues that I really love. So this is going to be a long process, taken over time, as long as I feel doing it. But the reason why I wanted to start talking about comic books is because I feel like I don't do enough of it. And it's something that you might not be able to tell from my backdrop that I'm really into. Maybe you can, especially with the horror stuff. But while I love horror books and while I love horror in general, I do still have a soft spot for superheroes. And I grew up ever since I was a young kid reading superhero comics, right? And this is what this video is going to focus on, which are mainly Marvel and DC exclusively. Stories that I found since my childhood all the way through my adulthood that I really enjoy. And now, trust me, this is not all of them. So this will have some sequels down the line where I bring up Marvel and DC superhero stuff again. But this is just this installment's picks for me. And I'm doing this to just share some stories that I love as recommendations. Some of these books do have a decent price tag to them, but most of them are just run filler stuff, and the stuff that are in that minor key territory, or they're expensive because it's a certain character with a certain cover or something on it, I will let you know. Or there might be an accessibility issue for one book because it was only released at a Walmart, for example. Use price as a discretion if that's going to inhibit you from, possibly acquiring these books to read. They're all online. You can read for free if you just want to read and not buy for your collection. But I wanted to pick books that you can just go to any flea market, antique store, local comic book shop that have a decent selection of, back issue or used comics. And you can find these for a cheap price and acquire them for your collection if you choose so. So with that out the way, let's get into my picks here for this installment. So I have 10 stories that I picked. I tried to be as even as possible, dividing up Marvel and DC, but it got kind of hard. And I think there is one extra Marvel over DC for this one. But I might, reset the balance in the future with this because there are plenty of DC comics that I love as much as Marvel. But most of these, at least with this installment, I wanted to pick the ones off the top of my head that I loved when I was a kid more so, and then found some that I discovered as an adult that I thought were just criminally overlooked and need to be read by people. So these first five are childhood favorites, and then we'll go into my adult favorites, I guess. So this first one comes from 1975. It was written by Doug Minch, penciled by Keith Pollard, and inked by Sal Trapani, and it's Master of Kung Fu 26. Look at this cover. You see Shang-Chi kicking a bad guy's head with some blood spurting out onto an Egyptian column. That's just screaming 70s exploitation cinema. Something that you would see there. Something wild and batshit. This is the kind of stuff that influenced filmmakers like John Carpenter, I feel. But I love this book. This was one of the first comics I can remember ever owning in my life. And I think I got this from like a flea market when I was a kid. But my childhood copy, I think had a hole right in Shang-Chi's crotch. I remember that, and I used to think it was funny. But I read this book up and down when I was a kid. And there's nothing really special about this book. This is kind of a minor key. It is the first appearance of the daughter of Fu Manchu. So it might run you maybe $10 or higher. But I think this story is so much fun. And it kind of showcases what made Bronze Age Marvel fun. And here's the thing. You had a bunch of things converging in the Bronze Age. You had exploitation cinema making a rise, like foreign films gaining popularity, or certain subgenres like giallo movies, slashers, kung fu movies, blaxploitation movies, hicksploitation movies. The list goes on. These were kind of like cult classic, popular favorite things. And Marvel made this character Shang-Chi to be kind of like a product of its time as well. And this book personifies why I love Shang-Chi, essentially. So this story involves Shang-Chi and his master getting ambushed where they live by these henchmen sit by the daughter of Fu Manchu to take care of them, as as an insurance policy, essentially. But as the story progresses, Shang-Chi and his master learn of this plot of these evil people, possibly over in the Middle East, particularly in Egypt, trying to harness the power of the scarab to resurrect the undead to be like their servants. And pretty much these servants are going to be, 1,000-year-old mummies with supernatural powers. So Shang-Chi heads to Egypt with his master, and they enter this pyramid, which is pretty much taken over by these evil people, and they have to, kung fu fight their way out of the situation, and it leads to a climactic finish. And there's one particular panel, I'm going to show it right here, that really scared me as a kid. It shows the mummy over in the corner here with the ruby eyes. And that just really unsettled me as a kid. I don't know what it was about it. But I always think, when I would think back on this story, I just think about how fun it was. And back when I was younger, I was into martial arts. And if you look at this tagline, it says martial arts in the Middle East. So I probably read that and was like, I need to own this. But as an adult, I can appreciate this story a whole lot more because I didn't understand the narrative sense and like the historical significance of this, I guess, with this being like a convergence of those things I mentioned. And I appreciate it in a whole different way. And it just personifies, like I said, why I love Bronze Age Marvel. So that's my first pick. My second pick is a 90s book, and it's probably dollar bin fodder out where you're at. It came out in 1996. It's written by Scott Lobdell and Stan Lee. It's penciled by Chris Bacallo and inked by Mark Buckingham. And it's Generation X 17. Now, if I remembered back on when I got this book, I probably got this out of an Ollie's bargain outlet comic pack in like the early 2000s. And I can remember when I first saw this cover, I was mesmerized by Stan Lee being on it, and he had word bubbles, and there's Universal Monsters, and I was big into Universal Monsters as a kid. So I read this book a ton when I was a child. And not a lot of people know about this hidden gem, especially Stan Lee collectors out there, or people that love reading stuff that Stan Lee has written. This is one of my favorite Stan Lee books, and it's a coveted gem. Every time I see this book in a dollar bin, I try to rescue it. And over the years, I have kind of recommended it to people, and if people ask for it, I would send it in like a care package to them, like, hey, read this book, it's fun. So yeah, basically this book is Stan Lee narrating this X-Men story, or X-Men universe story, involving this character down here, the Executioner, hunting down this mutant named Skin, as Skin is essentially trying to evade being captured by this mutant and killed, and he's being hunted for this accusation that the Executioner has on him, saying that he possibly killed another mutant years prior, and he's come to seek retribution for that person who lost their life. But Skin has a close-kept secret to his chest, and his friend that he's traveling with and running away with is injured and has to protect him. So they end up at this abandoned carnival, and chaos ensues, and there's a big whole spectacle with a wax museum where you see the Frankenstein's monster, the Wolfman, and you see the Hunchback of Notre Dame. It's just a super gritty, dark comic. I'll even show one of my favorite panels here. Like, you can see the art style here. It's not quite my cup of tea, personally, but what I do enjoy about this art style is how it's able to be brooding. And there's something about it that just, when I think about it, I mostly think about the Stan Lee narration bits, and I'll show you like an example of what that would look like. This is just so much fun. Seeing Stan Lee just interject the story in a comedic way, and it's counterbalanced by this dark, like almost fall Halloweenish atmosphered story. And while it's not the most significant thing ever, it sticks out in my memory just for being a fun comic. It's solid. There's nothing much wrong with it. It is definitely a 90s comic through and through, but I love it deeply. And I think most people would get some solid enjoyment out of this one. So yeah. Now, this pick, I definitely remember owning as a kid. This came out in 1994. This was written by Carl Kessel, penciled by Tom Grummett and Mike Pavlovec, and inked by Doug Hazelwood and Andy Parks. And this issue comes from Volume 4 of Superboy, issue number 4. Now, I actually have here a signed copy. Tom Grummett and Carl Kessel signed this book at some point, not under my ownership, but I was lucky to find this in like a dollar bin. I was like, who puts a signed book in a dollar bin like this? But I get why. It's like it's a lesser known issue of Superboy that probably means nothing to most people, but it means a lot to me because I remember getting this book, I think, in an Ollie's comic pack as well, around probably the age of 7 or 8. And I remember looking at the cover of this one a lot because it said Superboy, the animated series, and thinking that it was cool that Superboy's on TV while he's passed out on the phone. I was like, what's going on here? This is just really cool. But I kind of forgot the story as I got older. But when I reacquainted myself with the book and reread it, I remembered why I really enjoyed it. And it's basically a story about Superboy, at least this iteration of Superboy. He is sick, and he's pretty much being watched by his fellow friends, in I guess their headquarters or place of residence. And one of his friends has a pitch pilot cartoon show themed like Superman the Animated Series or Batman the Animated Series from the 90s, which is very funny to me. And I think this is why I love this comic story so much, is that throughout the story, the main cast witnesses what happens in the cartoon and how their characters are portrayed in the cartoon, and some take offense to it, some think that it's really inappropriate, the direction the cartoon is going, some think it's almost too juvenile and dumb. But that's the fun of the story here. It's kind of coming to talk about adaptations and what's appropriate within kids programming, which I think really helps the story. And with that aside, I do think that the art here does replicate Bruce Timm's art from the 90s cartoon shows that were super popular. It even pays homage to Max Fleischer shorts from the 1940s. I mean, it's so much fun. You're getting to watch an animated series episode in a meta way. It's just super fun. I love this book. It's nothing that you're supposed to take serious story-wise, but it's just a cool little inflection piece to enjoy. And I think more people need to experience this, so that's why it's on here. All right, my next pick comes from Marvel again, and it's from 1982. I had this book when I was a kid. I don't remember exactly how I got it. It might have been from a comic shop dollar bin, but my copy when I was a kid was roached. So I do have a better copy now as an adult, now that I'm able to afford it. This came out in 1982. It was written by Tom DeFalco, penciled by Ron Wilson, and it was inked by quite a few people. We have Bob Camp, Mike Esposito, Grant Giacola, Dan Green, Armando Gil, and Cheek Stone. And it's Marvel 2-in-1 Annual number 7. This book, look at the cover. When do you ever see Hulk, Colossus, Thor, Namor, Sasquatch, and the Thing, even Wonder Man on the same cover? And you see Thing with the boxing gloves here. It's just such an iconic cover to me. Now, this book is I guess a minor key. It's the first appearance of a character called the Champion, and the Champion, I guess, has been a staple in Marvel, or maybe he's just a cult favorite. Thinking off cuff, he has been in a few things that I've read, but the Champion makes his first appearance here, so this might be a little pricey, but I think that this story is fun because this is an event type of book. Normally, you would get stuff like this in like the giant-sized treasuries from back in the 70s and 80s, or you would get a crossover event in like the 90s when it started becoming that. But back in the day, when they just had like newsstands and, you know, emerging comic shops, they would make annuals like this for these big spectacle stuff. And this is possibly one of my favorite spectacle books I've ever read. Essentially, it's about the Champion character who debuts in this. He has come to Earth looking for people to fight. This is what he does. He goes from planet to planet, almost in like a Dragon Ball Z type of way, now that I'm thinking about it, looking for competition, but like in like a sporty way. He's not looking to kill people or anything. He's just looking to just show off how strong he is and how he's proven himself to be the strongest in the universe. And he's come to Earth and he's pulled the strongest heroes in the Marvel arsenal, like Colossus, known for his strength, the Hulk, definitely known for his strength, Ben Grimm, the Thing, Thor, Namor. These super strength humans, are, I guess, mutants or whatever you want to call them, have been chosen to essentially, train at this facility out in space. And through the training, they're going to be able to, get used to the stipulations of the match and all that, make it fair. And the champion welcomes the training because I guess he wants to be proven wrong in some way. But as you'll see in the story, that might not be the case. But we see these characters train out in space, and then there's some subplots dealing with some X-Men characters and some Fantastic Four characters, kind of putting the pieces together of where their friends went. And this might catch, national news, and all of Earth is notified of this. And this becomes like a huge spectacle event where these strong, larger-than-life superheroes get to face off against this guy named the Champion. It's just a really fun book. The art in this is incredible. I'll show you one of my favorite scenes in the whole comic here. And you can just look at the line work here by Ron Wilson. It's something that screams Bronze Age comics or, early Copper Age to me. It shows how innocent comics used to be, and how I kind of love the old framework of comics and the old mindset where they're just telling self-contained issues. Nowadays, if you see a self-contained issue, it's kind of like a solo story within a long-going arc, or they'll go out of their way to make like a 2-story issue or maybe an anthology book to kind of make shorter stories or self-contained stuff. But this is one of the examples where it's just pure fun to read. And you see these characters kind of build off of each other in a competitive way. And now, not saying that you can't get that from other comics, especially in Marvel from this time, but I like seeing all these characters get competitive with each other in that lighthearted way and not that serious in battle type of way. I don't know. It's just something intriguing about it to me. And I've always loved it, so that's why it's on here. Now this pick, the fifth one, is also another book from my childhood. And this is the last of the childhood nostalgic ones for this installment here. But I loved this book as a kid. This was one of my favorite issues. This had to be one of the earliest comics I had, because the comic I owned when I was younger had spine ticks galore. I probably ripped some pages out just so I can staple them on my old cork board that I had because I loved it so much. I know I defiled a comic book. But nonetheless, this book came out in 1998. It was written by Marv Wolfman, penciled by Thomas Derenick, and inked by Tom Palmer. And it's Marvel Team Up number 7 from Volume 2. This is the issue where Spider-Man teams up with Blade. And I'm a massive fan of both of these characters. I think they're some of my favorite Marvel characters ever. They're some of the earliest Marvel characters to ever get feature films. And Blade was getting a huge push around this time because New Line put out a film with his likeness in it. And as we'll see a few years after this point, Spider-Man by Sam Raimi and Avi Arad would hit theaters. So, it became a massive thing to me to own this book as a kid because when I was very young, around that point, there wasn't that many Marvel movies, and that's kind of what got me into wanting to read comics as much. Mainly, I was reading like Spider-Man, Blade, and X-Men. So this book had to be one of my favorites. And the story in this holds up very well. And this has to be one of my favorite Spider-Man stories, or any Spider-Man interaction with another Marvel character I've ever read. This one's a very deep one, I guess, if you want to take it as a deep thing, if you look at it from a certain perspective. This story is about this vampire that Blade is hunting, who has the ability to daywalk. He's been tracking him for a while. He tracks him to New York City. The vampire needs something from the university that Peter Parker attends and breaks into the building to, I guess, get a shot so he can keep daywalking. And while in the building, Peter's studying away. He loses focus, but he gets woken up by his good friend Jose, the janitor, who lets him know that, hey, you're sleeping, but you need to catch up on your studies so you get good grades. And Peter's reminded why Jose is his friend. But while he's distracted, he doesn't pick up on his spider senses that something's nearby and something's wrong. And Jose may or may not lose his life to this vampire that's in the building. And Peter changes into his suit, chases the vampire down, beats him up. He's angry of what happened to his friend, and pretty much leaves him to get justice from the police and his calling card, essentially. Well, after the vampire gets arrested and taken to prison on a nearby island, Blade is kind of upset that Spider-Man put this vampire into custody and has decided to break him out himself. And once he takes the vampire out of prison, he essentially starts interrogating him on this beach and like leaving him beached in the sand, saying, "Tell me how you can daywalk and what exactly is going on here." And the vampire's not budging, and Blade's like, "All right, we're gonna do this the hard way. I'm gonna take you to Louisiana." So while they're on trek to Louisiana, Spider-Man, Peter learns after he goes to his friend Jose's funeral and how emotional that was for him on the news that the vampire was broken out of prison by Blade. And since he knows who Blade is and knows where he lives, he's like, well, I got to hitch a ride to Louisiana. I owe it to Jose to give this killer some justice that he deserves, and does so. Well, let's say Spider-Man and Blade interact in Louisiana, but they're kind of going through changes within their own moral compass, I should say. Spider-Man gets kind of lost in vengeance in the pursuit of justice, while Blade, who's a merciless vampire killer, learns more about the vampire he's abducted and starts to realize that there might be more humanity left in this being than he gives credit for. And it's kind of the whole book is essentially a play on the ethical approach of how do you handle people that deserve justice, right? There is an idea out there that if you get justice enacted on you, you have to understand right and wrong. You have to have a moral compass. And Blade seems to think that vampires don't have that. But Spider-Man, deep down reluctantly believes that every being has a moral compass. And Spider-Man kind of has to learn the harsh truth in that. But Blade also kind of sees that sometimes lines do blur. And you can come across that you have no morals and no ethical understanding of any sort, but you could still be holding on to something inside that is. You know what I mean? And it's just a very somber story, and it's really creepy. There's a set piece in the graveyard in Louisiana, and I just love these characters and how they feed off of each other and how there's like dichotomy going on. It's a well-written story. Definitely, when people talk about Marv Wolfman books, I say that this is honestly my favorite Marv Wolfman book, and honestly one of my favorite Spider-Man books ever, just because I like how well written these characters are. So that's my number 5. Now my next pick at number 6, we have a modern comic. Now this is a Walmart exclusive book. I highly doubt you'll be able to find them in Walmarts these days. You might get lucky, find them at your comic shop if somebody turn in their collection or something. But you probably would have to buy this online if you want it in your collection. This came out in 2019. The specific story I'm referring to was written by Tom King, penciled by Andy Kubert, and inked by Sandra Hope. Now, this story is called The 1,000 Deaths of Lois Lane, and it appeared in Walmart's Superman 100-page comic giant issue number 7. Now, this book here contains mostly reprint stories that you'll see in other comic books, but the original story that's only found in this book is The 1,000 Deaths of Lois Lane. And when this story came out, I was blown away by how well Tom King wrote Superman in this issue, to the point where this was like the first time I can remember actually identifying with Superman and thinking that finally a writer gets how to make Superman relatable. So all this book is, and this is all you need to know, is that Superman starts to have these thoughts about Lois Lane losing her life in graphic, violent, death kind of ways. And as he's playing it through the scenarios and as they unfold, he realizes that he can always be too late to save her. And the reason behind this is that he's thought, you can look at the history of Superman comics, in previous conversations he's had in his mind about Lois, historically has been he's pretty much a godlike being here. He has super hearing, super cold breath, laser vision. He has power of flight, super speed. He can breathe in space. You know, the list goes on of ability, super strength. But the one thing that he comes to grips with in this book, in this specific story, is that he cannot control human will. He cannot control good and evil. And no matter how powerful he is as a being, the mind and the choices of people matter the most. And he can do everything to his best capabilities to help save Lois if something were ever to happen where she's put in jeopardy. But the ultimate decision comes down to the person that decides to do this to her. And I think it's a very powerful story. It makes Superman relatable. He goes from this, this pulp hero that's just known for fighting robots or bad guys in Metropolis and breaking buildings and soaring them up into space, stuff like that. This personifies the character. It gives a different introspective to such a important mainstay in comic book history. And I love it. I love it deeply. This is honestly one of my favorite comic stories of Superman of all time, if not my favorite, just for how simple it is, how unironically violent it is, and how thought-provoking it is at the same time. I love this book deeply. So that's why it's on here. Okay. So my number 7 goes to a book. This is a Marvel book here. It comes from 2009. It was written by John Arcudi and penciled and inked by Steve Ellis. And the story in question is USA Comics 70th Anniversary Special. As you can see, this character, if you're not familiar with this character at all, this character is known as the Destroyer. And the Destroyer was one of Stan Lee's earliest comic creations he ever made, or one of the earliest characters he ever wrote about. And this book not only shows me how underused Destroyer has been in the history of Marvel Comics and how much of a shame that is, but also shows why I love comics to begin with, specifically pulp era comics. This book, through and through, is pulp era in spirit, as a lot of these comics were from this Timely Comics Inc. Anniversary series that they put out. I think they did like Captain America comics and All Winners comics as well. The list goes on. But this one has to be my favorite because it showcases such an obscure character. And this has to be my favorite Destroyer comic I've ever read. And I've read every single story he's ever been in at this point in some fashion. And all it is that this American reporter is over in Germany during World War II. And the Destroyer happens to hear that this American reporter is there. And he has this inkling that the American reporter needs to be shown something very important to understand what's actually happening here. And the Destroyer essentially goes on this rampage in this pulp-like fashion, swashbuckling adventure type of stuff, crawling on trains, busting up the fisticuffs, the weapons, and the guns, to get this reporter and take him on this journey through the Germany countryside as they fight Nazis in the trains and such, and in different locations that they arrive at, to end up at this specific concentration camp where the Destroyer shows him, this is what you need to see. And there's a revelation about his costume even that represents what's going on here and why it's important for this war to be a thing and why it's important to stand up against these type of people. And it's just a pure heroism story through and through. It's simply told. There's nothing too special about the art, but the art really does pop. And there's some scene in action sequences that are super fun. This to me just shows that there's an element missing in modern comics that I've noticed. And this is like the most recent comic that I think really does showcase what it means to be a hero. And we're not just talking about, backstory motives that have become popularized, like, the Uncle Ben from Peter Parker or Bruce Wayne's parents dying in Batman. No, this is like just a fundamental moral basis of why you do what you do. And I love everything about this book. It's not going to be the most special thing for everybody, especially if you read this thinking that I'm gassing it up. But I think you'll appreciate it if you look at it from the lens of just narrative and the art and getting to see an obscure character get the spotlight. So there you go. I think you'll really enjoy this one. All right. Now my number 8 goes to a book that I remember when this book came out. My comic shop owner, I walked in the store and he's reading this book and he announces to everyone, and I kid you not, he's like, y'all, everybody go pick this book up. This has to be the best Batman book to come out in years. And literally, everybody picked this book up that day and bought all the copies. But he was right on the money. When I read this thing, I loved it to pieces. This book came out in 2021, believe it or not. So we got a modern book. This was an installment in the second volume of the run, and it's Batman Black and White, issue number 5. Now I have here the variant cover, but there's 5 stories within this specific comic, and I really enjoy all of them. There's a Nightwing story in here that I'm not going to discuss all that much. There's a beginning story with, like, I think Bruce Wayne and his dad from memory, but I could be mistaken there. But it involves, like, that type of idea. And then there's a story about a character from the Long Halloween and, like, a what-if scenario almost. That's really intriguing. But there's 2 stories in this book that I think are brilliant. And it's Signals and the Riddle. Signals is a story about Commissioner Gordon. And this one is written and penciled and inked by Lee Weeks. This story is incredible. The art style is beautiful here. I'll show you a panel here of it. Look at this. It's just poetic. And the whole story is a breeze. It's about, Jim Gordon getting a note where atop the building where the bat signal is at, and he's going through the motions of, do I signal Batman or can I handle this on my own? And he has to, come to grips with the idea maybe he's overusing Batman, and maybe he can handle this on his own. And he tries to handle it on his own, and it possibly works out for him. And he sees that, you don't need Batman for everything to solve some problems, even though he was nervous or maybe apprehensive at first to do so. I just think this is a brilliant story, and it really does show how Commissioner Gordon can be a compelling character in comic books. And I would love to see a Commissioner Gordon spin-off series, just of him in Gotham or something, going through his own motions. There might have been something like this already done, but I want to see a new take of it. You know what I mean? I think these modern writers, especially people like Lee Weeks, Tom King, the list goes on, they understand Batman very well, probably more than most old school writers. So Batman, yeah. Well, this is not even a Batman story, but this story was one of the earlier ones that made me realize, yeah, this book is awesome. But the second story, I think, is my personal favorite from this, and it's called The Riddle. This was written by Kieran Gillen and penciled and inked by Jamie McKelvey. This is a choose-your-own-adventure story where you get to role play as Batman as he's interacting with, I think, the Riddler and Killer Croc or something like that. And each wrong choice sends you down a path that is not favorable for Batman. But through this exercise, as you get to, play this story over and over again, you get to see these decisions, and I guess Kieran Gillen's understanding of what makes Batman Batman and his attention to detail really is one of his superpowers and his detective abilities, because him understanding his surroundings and his situations is how he's able to come out unscathed as a mortal man. So it's incredible. It's an incredible exercise of the Batman himself, and I love this story to pieces. It's kind of niche. I know it's a choose-your-own-adventure story, but this would be my must-read from this. It's absolutely incredible. And all the other 3 stories, I'm not going to mention all that much, still super fun. So there you go. All right, next to last pick here, we have another Marvel book. This book came out in 1997. It was written by Joe Kelly, penciled by Pete Woods, and inked by Nathan Massengill. And this is Deadpool number 11 from volume 3. Now this book is just pure fun. This is pure fun incarnate. It has to be one of my top 3 favorite Deadpool stories ever made. And this is an infamous one, I guess for price, because this is an Amazing Fantasy 15 homage. It's Deadpool. This book is kind of pricey. So if you go out to your comic shop, or maybe you're looking online to get a copy of this for your collection, it might run you a little bit of money, but the story inside is what really counts here for this video. It's not to buy it to collect it. If you want to collect it, go ahead, but this story is amazing. So Deadpool has found himself in a wormhole, and he ends up transported into the Amazing Spider-Man issue 47 from the volume 1 run in the Silver Age. And he has to essentially role play as a character in the comic because he's taken the place of another character. And throughout the story, he gets to observe what it was like to live in the time. And he thinks that there's a lot of corny stuff, there's corny people, and his sass just really plays up to the other characters who are written more serious back in the day. And there's something about it that's super funny, and it's very aware, kind of making a stab at the Silver Age of comics, but in a fun way. It's not insulting it too much, but it's funny. And he ends up having to face off against the main villain from that issue, which is Kraven the Hunter. And it's super fun watching him and Kraven go at it and bicker with each other. It kind of shows that Kraven had a lot of potential to be a funny character, or have his own spin-off comic in that funny way. But I love this book to pieces. It's just, you don't see something like this every day. In my opinion, this book here, from this volume 3 run, made Deadpool what he is today. Books like this helped it. Even though this stuff was kind of going on beforehand, this is where Joe Kelly really hit a stride with Deadpool, in my opinion. And this has to be one of my favorite Deadpool books ever made. So that's why it's on here. And this last book, it's one of my personal favorite comic books of all time. Whenever people ask me, hey, what are some of your favorite comic books that aren't key issues? I'm like, this book. I love this book. It's a anthology book. It's a crapshoot kind of thing, but I love it for it. It came out in the year 2000. And it's JLA Showcase 80-page giant. I think there's like 7 or 8 stories in this, I believe. But most of these I have read so many times. I've read these stories so many times because they're just so much fun. And there's so many things in here that appeal to my interests that I love. So there's actually 4 stories I want to talk about specifically. One is called The Dogs of War. The other is Leapt for Pixie Dust, The Flashback of Notre Dame, and Toy Story. These are some of my favorite comic stories of all time. Not only because I've read them so many times, just because I think they're just tailor-made for my taste. I like little one-and-done stories, stuff like that. I'm very in the minority with that. That's kind of why I like anthology horror and stuff like Creepshow in the back that you'll see there. But this book, I have loved since I was a kid. I think I owned this when I was younger, and as I got more well-versed into series like Captain Atom specifically, and watching cartoons like Gargoyles, this issue hits even more because this has something in it with the creator that was behind those things that I read, Greg Weisman. It kind of marries those two properties, but we'll get into that. But yeah, the first story, The Dogs of War, was written by Len Kaminski and penciled and inked by Ariel Olivetti. And this story is essentially about Plastic Man, who's set to watch the multiverse monitor while the rest of the JLA is off doing some fighting. And there's an intermission coming from this race of dog people that have these stipulations with the JLA. And the Plastic Man's like, you know what? They're all gone, but I guess I can go solo this. So he meets up where these dog people have landed. And now he's role-playing as all the other heroes on the team. I think he poses as the Flash, Batman, Superman, and even Wonder Woman. And I'll show you a panel of some of this. It's hilarious. I mean, this stuff is great. And it showcases why I think Plastic Man is an underrated hero or underrated character in DC Comics. He's hilarious. And it just really works as a Plastic Man one-and-done story. I love it. The other story I want to talk about is Left for Pixie Dust. This story needs more attention. I think this was written by Jim Alexander and penciled and inked by Cam Smith. This story features the Flash and I think Iris. They're out by this well, and this dust kicks up within the well, and it turns out to be this pixie named Liverstains. And if you don't know who Liverstains is, he's like this really weird, kooky, otherworldly character in DC. He goes back to the Golden Age. He's been in a few things I've read. But Liverstains has approached riding a flying dog, like a sheepdog. And how he steers the dog is by playing with its ears. And he has challenged the Flash to a race, essentially, around the world. And Liverstains keeps up with the Flash. Yes, this is a Flash racing issue. You know, like the iconic Superman and Flash racing issues that people really love. No, this is him racing Liverstains. It's so much fun. You need to check this story out. It's hilarious. Now, my favorite story, maybe next to the last one here, is the Greg Weisman story I was talking about. This is called The Flashback of Notre Dame. This is written by Greg Weisman, penciled by Christopher Jones, and inked by Mark Stegbauer. Now, this book, or the story I should say, is one of my favorite comics of all time, or it helps lend to that because of my massive fandom with the Captain Atom run that Greg Weisman was a part of, and because of my love for gargoyles. I just adore those things. And this story is about Captain Atom. He and his love interest, they decide to take a stroll because Captain Atom has these powers where he can pretty much instantaneously teleport. They end up in like Notre Dame in like a romantic setting to just, you know, be romantic and make out and stuff. But through the moonlight kind of reflecting off of him, it activates these gargoyle statues on Notre Dame. And these gargoyles come to life, and essentially Justice League Europe has to step in once these flying gargoyles start wreaking havoc. Like I think there was Metamorpho and Kilowog that's also featured in this. They're trying to put a stop to these gargoyles essentially. But if you look at the designs of them, you can clearly tell that they're clones, like the backdoor clones of the Disney cartoon characters like Goliath, Bronx, Brooklyn, Hudson, and all that. Yeah, they're pretty much here, but in spirit because he couldn't get the likeness rights to actually include them in the comic. But the story's just super fun. And as a fan of both things, it tickles my heartstrings. And especially if you're a fan of both things, you should check this out because it's an unknown crossover that not a lot of people talk about. And the last story here, I think is incredible. It's something that I have fun every time I read it. It's called Toy Story. And this story is written by Chuck Kim, penciled by Eric Battle, and inked by Andrew Hennessy. Now, this story features a group of boys that you learn later on, because at first the story starts off as Joker having this plan or plot of doom against Batman, Superman, and maybe Doomsday might be involved. You know, you get the sense like, hey, this is just a regular old comic. But it's recontextualized that these boys playing out on a playground or by the woods are playing with these action figures of these characters. And they're arguing and bickering over what direction to take the story and what's allowed with certain characters. Can you make the Joker a hero? And throughout the story, they get into some scuffles and some legitimate bouts. And these kids get upset with each other, and they start defaming each other's toys. But there's an act of heroicism through the love of the toys that comes out with a certain character that they need to make a hero. And it's just something that you don't see every day. I've never seen a story like this. It's super different. And this is one of the stories, maybe next to the Greg Weisman one, that I come back to the most in this book. And I didn't mention a few other ones that are really good in here. I think there's one with Steel and Aquaman that's kind of fun. The first story is kind of fun. There's even a story called Space Wolf where Superman, Batman, and I think Kyle Rayner, they all fight this Space Wolf character, and the art's really good too. I mean, there's other stories to appreciate in here, but this to me just encapsulates perfectly why I love reading comics. And this is one of my favorite comics I've ever read. But if I had the biggest recommendation for you all to go try, not only because it's an anthology and a crapshoot, but because I think the stories are just super memorable and fun, it's this book. So yeah, that's my first installment. I think the next one I want to do is more horror comic centered. So I'm not gonna stick to just DC and Marvel. I'm gonna go across the independents as well, and just show you some of my favorite horror comic issues that you should pick up for your collection, or to pick up to read, more importantly. So yeah, until next time, take care. Let me know down in the comment section, what are some Marvel and DC superhero comic stories that you love? I'm dying to know, and I'll see you next time.